Hello and welcome to the Education Connection Day for Midland Storytelling Festival. This program provides content for secondary level grades 7 through 12. Our tellers are Charlotte Blake Alston of Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, Mary Hamilton of Frankfort, Kentucky, and Bil Lepp of Charleston, West Virginia. Now, as you listen to their stories, pay close attention to the difference in their artistic styles, how they communicate and tell a story. Then, as you think about your own communication skills, realize that if you can think it and speak it, then you can write it. Let's listen.
My mother said that when I was born, I ran into the doctor's hands. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, but I did spend my childhood running. If my mother was baking and discovered that she was missing an ingredient, she would send me to the store when I was old enough to go by myself because I would run all the way to Mr. Jim's grocery store, 3 blocks from our house, and run all the way back. She only had to wait 5 minutes for that vanilla flavoring or that half a teaspoon of baking powder. If she asked one of my brothers to go, she might have to wait 15, 20, 25 minutes because they would just amble along and then stop to talk to friends along the way. And she would have to come to the door and call out, "Alan, stop talking and go get my butter." So I became my parents' official emissary of errands. They sent me to the grocery store. I went to the pharmacy, the fish market, the poultry store, the ice cream shop, and the peanut store. We had a peanut store in our community. I was good with remembering instructions without having to have them written down. My mother would like a pound of bacon sliced or number 10. Thank you very much. Or my mother would like 4 whole porgies, head off and split. With my friends, we played outside summer, winter, fall, and spring. We played double dutch, jump rope, hand clapping games, hopscotch, hide and seek, leapfrog, crack the whip, hot cold butter beans, stickball, red rover, tag, and dodgeball. Nobody can ever hit me with the dodgeball. We divided into teams for softball and basketball. By the time I got to high school, I was ready for high school level team sports. I became a 3 sport athlete. I played volleyball in the fall, I played basketball in the winter, and tennis in the spring. I loved practicing. I loved the drills as much as I loved playing the games and competing against other teams. I loved running laps. I loved the layup drills, the figure eights, the dribbling, the passing drills, the rebound drills, and lots of time at the end of practice spent on foul shots. Sometimes our high school coach would designate a certain amount of shots that you had to take before you could even leave the gym. In college, you had to take a minimum of 25 foul shots and you had to make a minimum of 5 in a row. If you missed one, you had to start all over again from one. I was not the best foul shooter, so I took those practices really seriously until by the time I reached my junior year of college, my foul shooting had improved quite a bit, and I was no longer nervous when I went to the foul line. I had even established a routine of sorts at the foul line. First, I would take a deep breath in and blow it out. And then I placed my right foot with my toes right up against the foul line so that my toes were pointed in the exact line with that basket. The distance between the foul line and the basket is 15 feet. I would make sure that my toes were lined right up. I took 2 dribbles, one, two, did a reverse spin on the ball, caught it in my hands, did another two dribbles, one, two, did my reverse spin, caught it in my hands. I would do my final exhalation to relax my entire body. I would drop down to a semi squat, then rise up and release. I would imagine myself on the line at the closing moments of a game, when the clock was ticking down to a second or two and victory was on the foul line in my hands. I could imagine the feeling of the release of the ball. You know, as soon as that ball leaves your hands, whether it's going to be short and bounce off the front of the rim, whether it's going to be hard and bounce off the backboard, or if you didn't put enough spin or enough arc on the ball for it to go in. But in my fantasy, I would release, I would hear it go through the net with that sweet sound. And then the crowd would just go wild. They would pick me up and carry me on my shoulders all across the campus. Well, that season, as in my freshman and sophomore years, Immaculata College was on our basketball schedule. Immaculata was a small Catholic women's college in Pennsylvania. Now, the college was small, but their basketball team was our most feared opponent. In fact, by 1967, they were every team's most feared opponent. Immaculata ate women's basketball teams for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Their locker rooms for the visiting team were littered with the flotsam and jetsam of other defeated opponents. There would be streamers from pom-poms from the other team. There would be tongues ripped out of some players' Chuck Taylor all-star basketball shoes. There would be ragged pieces of torn uniforms ripped from women struggling for possession of the ball when an Immaculata player would tie the ball up in a defensive move. Once in their gym, their sweet and pious nuns would bring pots and pans and noisemakers to every single game and fill the gym with thundering cacophony of madness when the opposing team was, wait for it, on the foul line. We never even had any thoughts of actually winning a game against them, but something felt different to me that day. I felt a wave of energy and confidence. I told my teammates, we're not coming here to just run some plays and practice to see how the plays work. We're here to play. We're here to win. We're here to compete. We're going to give these women all we've got. We're just the same as they. They got two legs. We got two legs. They got two arms. We got two arms. They run up the court. We run up the court. We're going to win this game. Let's go. Let's put everything we've got into it. And the strangest thing began to happen. We scored first. We fought and scrapped for every loose ball. I hauled down rebound after rebound after rebound. By halftime, we were neck and neck. The score was tied. What? Immaculata? The score was tied with Immaculata. In the locker room at halftime, we sucked on our oranges like they were pure gold laced with adrenaline. When we came back out with that halftime buzzer, I went to the center court and out jumped my opponent for the tap. We started the second half with possession of the ball and scored. The nuns were in a frenzy. They banged their pots through the entire game, not just when we were on the foul line. And with all that banging, whenever we went to the foul line, we made every single foul shot. What was going on? We were behind by 1 point as the clock ticked down in the fourth quarter. Immaculata had possession of the ball. We switched from a zone defense to man. The clock, I noticed, was at 11 seconds. And then Then it happened. Their guard telegraphed a lazy pass to their center in the middle of the key. The key is that area right there in front of the basket. And I saw it coming. I saw it coming. I threw my hand up, I tapped it, and I intercepted the ball. I headed down the other end of the court as fast as I could run, as fast as I could dribble, and to go up for the winning layup when I felt the hit. I landed on the floor just as the buzzer had sounded. I had been fouled just before the end of the game in regulation. I had 2 shots on the foul line with no time left on the clock. Take that, Immaculata. I could tie the game with the first shot. I could win the game with the second shot and go down in history as the player who carried her team on her shoulders and took down the mighty match. I went to the line. The pots and pans were loud. The screams of the nuns were even louder. Dribble 1, bounce 2, reverse spin. Dribble 1, dribble 2, reverse spin. Did my semi-squat. I rose up, and the moment I released the ball, I knew it was short. The ball bounced off the front of the rim. Now, this would be the shot for the tie and 5 minutes of overtime. I exhaled a second time. Dribble 1, dribble 2, spin. Dribble 1, dribble 2, spin. Relax. Squat. As I raised up, in my peripheral vision, I could see everyone in the stands on either side rising up to their feet. It was perfectly quiet. The nuns were no longer even banging on the pots. They raised up, released. Along with me, the crowd watched every rotation of that ball. I finished my college basketball playing days, played on several women's basketball teams in Philadelphia in the Department of Recreation, played a year in the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union. I coached boys and girls basketball, boys and girls of all ages. But throughout the remainder of my playing days and my coaching days, that moment on the foul line at Immaculata College remained a wound in my heart. When my first shot bounced off the front of the rim, I thought, you just need a little bit more juice. I put a little bit of extra juice on that second shot. It hit the back of the backboard, bounced straight up into the air, bounced on the rim, and began to spin around, around, around until it popped out. The game was over. But I have to tell you, I don't remember anything else that happened that day. But I think after so many years of playing ball, so many years of coaching, many most valuable player trophies, and many other trophies besides. At this point in time, 74 years old, I think I can finally let that game go. 1968, most valuable player.
Near the edge of a big forest, there once lived a woodcutter who had three beautiful daughters, Emily, Ella, and Lisa. All three girls had hair as blonde as their mother's and as fine as the tender silks of corn. When Lisa, the youngest, was just a toddler, their mother died, and the father and the three girls, well, they carried on with their lives as best they could. The girls grew older, the girls grew stronger, and they were able to be left home alone. At home, to take care of the house while their father did his work. And a pattern developed. Every morning the family would awake, they would eat breakfast, then the father would take up his axe, he would go into the forest to cut wood. The girls would work in the garden, they would take care of the house, they would clean the dishes, they would prepare some dinner, and Emily, the eldest, would pack up some of that dinner and she would take it into the woods for their father. Now, she never knew exactly where her father would be working, but she could follow the sound of his axe, and in that way she would find him, she would bring him food, and she would help him carry the wood he had cut home. One day, the father came home from the woods and he was angry. He said, "Where's Emily? Why didn't she bring me some food?" And Ella and Lisa said, "Well, she took you food. She left hours ago." And the father rushed back into the woods to search for Emily. He didn't come home until it was nearly dark, and he came home alone. The next day, the woodcutter said, "I'm going to look for Emily. You girls stay home." And he left. And he had been gone for quite some time. They had eaten their breakfast, they had done their chores, they had eaten their dinner. They were sitting on the porch, and they heard the sound of their father's axe. And Ella said, "Oh, Daddy's working. Well, that means he's found Emily, and she's going to be so hungry. She's been outside all night long. I'll take them both food." And she prepared food, and she went off into the forest. When it was near dark, the woodcutter returned home alone. And Lisa said, "Daddy, where are Ella and Emily?" He said, "What do you mean, where's Ella? I've been searching for Emily all day. What do you mean, where's Ella?" And Lisa explained that they had heard the sound of his axe and Ella had gone to take food to him and Emily. Well, the next morning, the woodcutter and Lisa ate breakfast, and the woodcutter said, "Lisa, stay home. I'm going to go look for your sisters. You stay home." Oh, Lisa was a good girl. She cleaned up the breakfast dishes. She tidied up the house. She went out into the garden and worked. She was truly a good girl. But she had never been by herself ever. And she grew so bored, so bored. She swept the back porch, she swept the front porch, she swept the house, she dusted everything. She fixed herself some dinner, she ate it, she cleaned up her dishes, she sat out on the front porch, and she was so bored. And then she heard the sound of her father's axe, and she thought, "I know he told me to stay home. But I know that's just because I'm the youngest. They're always telling me what to do. They always think I can't do anything. But I know Emily used to talk about how she would go in the woods. She would listen to Daddy's axe, and that's how she would know which way to go. I can listen. I can be careful. I can walk." And so she fixed up a pail of food, and she headed into the woods. She followed the sound of her father's axe, and whenever it stopped, she stopped walking. And she waited. And when the axe started again, she would change her direction ever so slightly, and she would follow that sound. And whenever it stopped, she stopped, and she waited. Over and over, she followed the sound of her father's axe. She began to think she might not ever find him. It seemed the axe was always about the same distance away, but a little bit different. But she thought, well, he's working in that area of the forest and he has to move to different trees. I'll find them, I'll find them, I'll just keep walking. And so she did. But then, when the axe stopped and did not start again, it was only then that Lisa realized it was getting dark. And she had no idea where she was, no idea which way to go home. She was going to spend the night in the woods. Well, she had some food. By then she had walked so long she was feeling hungry, so she ate a bit of that food. And then she began to look around for a possible safe place to spend the night. She did find a large tree. It looked like a good climbing tree, and she thought, oh, I could climb up into this tree, but then if I fall asleep and I fall out of the tree, that will kill me. But if I stay here on the ground, wild animals could find me, and they could harm me. And she began to just walk around the tree, wondering if she might just lean against it, and she was still trying to decide what to do with that tree, and it was growing darker and darker. And when it was fully dark, in one of her walks around that tree, off in the distance, she noticed a light, a blue light. And she thought, oh, a light, a light, that means people. And so, following that light, walking carefully not to run into a tree, be hit by a branch, just following the light, she made her way through the woods. She made her way to a clearing, and sure enough, there was a house with a blue light in the window. Oh, she walked up on the porch and she knocked on the door. And a man came to the door. He opened it and he looked down at her and she said, hi, my name is Lisa. I was lost and I saw your blue light. He said, oh, well, I was just about to sit down and have a little soup for my supper. So come on in, join me. He seemed nice. So she went in and she ate soup with him. And then he said, I believe I recognize you. I think you are one of the woodcutter's girls. And she said, well, yes, sir, I am. He said, well, now, I know where you live. And in the morning, I'll be able to take you home. But for now, you'll just need to spend the night. And after they had eaten, he went over to a cedar chest and he began to get out quilts and he piled them on the floor to make a sleeping pallet for her right beside the hearth. And then he went off into another room to sleep. In the morning, she woke up. He came out of his room. He prepared breakfast for them. She folded up the quilts, put them back in the cedar chest, sat down and ate breakfast with him. And then he said, now, I have a few errands I need to run, but as soon as I finish those errands, I'll come back and I'll take you on home. She said, oh, that would be wonderful. He said, now, you just make yourself comfortable and look around the house all you want. And you can walk around the yard if you want to, but do not go into my storage sheds. And she said, oh, I wouldn't do that. And he left. Well, she cleaned up the breakfast dishes and then she looked around the house and she saw a closet and she opened it and in that closet there was a broom and she thought, oh well, good, I can clean things for him. And so she swept his floor and she swept the front porch and then she went out back and she swept the back porch and she couldn't help but notice that he had a lot of storage sheds. And she thought, well, my goodness, I wonder what he keeps in those. You know, he told me not to go in, but he didn't say that I couldn't look. And so she propped the broom up against the wall and she walked across the yard to the storage sheds. And they were locked. Every single shed was locked. And she thought, I wonder why he told me not to go in. I couldn't go in anyway. They're all locked. And she went back up to the porch and she got the broom and walked inside and opened that closet door. And as she set the broom in the closet, she noticed a ring, a silver ring, hanging from a nail. And on that ring was one key. And she thought, huh. Well, she took that ring, she went outside, and she walked up to a storage shed and she stuck that key in the padlock, but wouldn't turn. And she moved on to the next shed, shed after shed after shed. That key wouldn't turn. And when she came to the very last shed, she stuck the key in the lock, turned it, and it popped right open. Oh, she took the lock and the key and she put those in her pocket, and then she opened the door of the shed. And by the light that came in, she could see that there was a basket just barely inside the shed. And she glanced at that basket. She thought, well, now that is the strangest thing. Why would anybody have a basket of corn silks? Huh? Why would they do that? And why would he care if somebody saw that he had a basket of corn silks? And she leaned in to look a little closer, and then she stepped in to see closer. There was something odd. Skin there beside the heads, her sisters' heads, there in that basket. She opened the door a little wider, let a little more light in, and there were her sisters' bodies on the far wall of the storage shed, pinned up against that wall. Lisa closed that door and her hands were shaking. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to get that hasp back over the lock, the padlock back there locked again, and she hurried back into the house and she put that ring back on that nail, and then she began to pace. What should I do? What should I do? If I leave and I won't know which way to go. I don't know which way for home. But if I leave and he sees me out in the woods, he'll know. He'll know that I was out there. He'll know. What am I going to do? And then she heard him out on the front porch and she sat down on the couch. And he came in the house and he said, well, now, have you been a good girl? And she said, well, I cleaned up our breakfast dishes and then I swept your house for you. Well, that was awful kind of you. Did you go in my storage sheds? Well, you told me not to. Well, but did you? Did you go in my storage sheds? Oh, you told me not to. You told me not to. He said, well, maybe you are a good girl. Good girl, show me your hands. And she held out her hands, and he inspected them, turned them over. He said, huh, maybe you really are a good girl. Good girl, show me your feet. And he pulled up a chair, sat right in front of her. Now lift them up, show me your feet. And when she lifted up her feet, he saw blood, a stain of blood on the bottom of her foot where she had stepped inside the storage shed. You are not a good girl. You're just like all the others. Now I'm going to get my knife. And he got up to get his knife, and Lisa didn't wait. She ran. She ran from that living room. She ran from that house. She ran in the woods. But she didn't know her way. She was just running blindly through the woods, and he was coming after her. And she tripped over a root. He grabbed her. He hauled her back. And soon she was in the storage shed with her sisters. Then he cleaned himself up. He took his knife, he chopped up vegetables, put on a pan of water to make soup, and when it was fully dark, he set his blue light in his window. And it wasn't long before there was a knock at his door, and when he opened it, there stood a girl. She had hair as dark as a crow's wing. It curled all about her face. And she looked at him and she said, hi, sir. My name is Susan and I was lost, but I saw your blue light. That story's called The Blue Light. It is a variation on a Bluebeard story. Bluebeard comes from the French version. Blue Light was collected by Leonard Roberts. It's published in my book, Kentucky Folk Tales. Leonard Roberts also collected a similar story called The Three Yarn Balls, and that's published in the Leonard Roberts collection called Old Greasy Beard Tales from the Cumberland Gap. What these Bluebeard stories, Bluebeard, after the French fairy tale printed back in the late 1600s, what these stories have in common is that there's always a forbidden room. Sometimes the stories end with the girl's brothers coming to save her. Sometimes, as in the Grimm brothers version, the Fitcher's Bird, the girl saves herself. Sometimes, as in the Old Greasy Beard Three Yarn Balls, the girl listens to the help given by a bird and she gets saved that way. What sets the Blue Light apart from the others, of course, is that we don't know what's going to happen to Susan at the end. Maybe she'll save herself. Maybe she'll wind up in the shed. It is left unresolved, and that makes it a bit more chilling. Thank you for listening.
It was 2 in the morning before buck season. I was sitting in my living room watching a movie, waiting for the sun to come up so I could go deer hunting, when I heard a knock on the back door. Well, I knew not to answer it, because I knew if anybody was knocking on my back door at 2 in the day of buck season, it had to be Skeeter. And if Skeeter was knocking on my back door, he had come up with one of his plans, and I didn't want to go along with it. But there was no free will involved. I was sucked up off the couch and drawn to the back door. And when I opened the door, there stood Skeeter, with a diabolical grin on his face and a paper bag in his hand. And I got a sick feeling way down in my stomach. But I invited him in anyway. He didn't say nothing. It was like letting a vampire into my house. And Skeeter went, and he sat down at the kitchen table, and he put that paper bag on the floor. And I went to brew up a pot of coffee, because I could tell it was going to be a long night. And after a while, I brought the coffee over, and finally, Skeeter said to me, he said, "I've been up all night sewing." And he reached down, and he opened up that paper bag. And he reached in, and he pulled out something long and brown and furry. And he sort of flipped it open and pulled it on his head. And by gosh, that kid could sew. What he had made was a perfect replica of an 8-point buck's head. And he said to me from inside that deer mask, he said, "Don't worry, I made one for you too." So there we were, 2 young bucks drinking coffee at the kitchen table. I know, it is a terrible joke, but if you'd have thought of it, you'd have put it in your story. But I knew that couldn't be the whole plan. And after a minute, Skeeter said, "That ain't the whole plan." He said, "I also took a mannequin. I dressed him in hunter's orange, and I tied him to the hood of my truck." He said, "What we are going to do, not do you want to. He said, what we are going to do is drive around town like it's people season." And we got one. He said, "We'll drive up to the check-in station, we'll check our human, everybody will think it's funny." Well, it was funny, but it's precisely the sort of funny that you don't want your dad to find out that it was you who did it. So we decided to go hide out. We had about 6 hours to kill before dawn. So we went up the old service road at the state park. We were sitting up there in Skeeter's truck, just waiting for the sun to rise. Now, Skeeter had just got his truck brand new that summer, only had about 80,000 miles on the odometer. But the odometer was in the glove box. It was mechanically disassociated from every other part of the vehicle. And the first time I'd ever gone to roll down the passenger side window, I took about a quarter turn on the crank, and the window just went thunk, and we never saw it again. Which was fine in the summer, because the truck didn't have air conditioning. But that night, it was about 20 degrees outside, and the wind was blowing right in that open window. There was frost building up on both sides of the windshield. We didn't have enough money to buy enough gasoline to run the engine, to run the heater for 6 hours. I don't know if I've made this clear, but Skeeter and I were pretty dumb. So we weren't dressed properly. Finally, I reached in that bag, pulled out one of those masks and put it on. Well, it was warm and cozy inside that mask. Skeeter reached in that bag, pulled out his mask, and put his on. Pretty soon we fell asleep. Well, when I fell asleep, my head fell right out that open window. And you know how sometimes when you're sleeping, your subconscious will pick up on something and be like, wake up, get up, do something. But other times, maybe like a snake crawled into your bed, your subconscious will just sort of whisper, now, open your eyes, but don't move. Well, that's what my subconscious was telling me. So I just sort of opened my eyes. And sure enough, about 30 yards down the road, there were two bright lights, about 4 or 5 feet apart. They were maybe 3 feet off the ground. And the sun was just starting to turn the sky gray. I could barely make out the silhouette of a large American sedan. And as the sun came up over the mountaintop, 2 sunbeams came down the mountain, up that dirt road, over the back of that car, and across the top of that car. And one of those sunbeams went through a blue light, and one of those sunbeams went through a red light. The door of that car opened up. Sheriff Hasbro started to get out. Now, Sheriff Hasbro was a big man. He was about 6'8", 6'9", weighed about 480 pounds. But it wasn't all muscle, so it took him a long time to get out of a Ford Tempo. And as Sheriff Hasbro was getting out of that car, I was poking Skeeter, trying to wake him up. And pretty soon, Sheriff Hasbro was creeping up the road. He had that big flashlight on his shoulder. He was coming in slow. Y'all know that saying, discretion is the better part of valor? Well, Sheriff Hasbro was real into that better part of valor. But I don't want to call the man a coward, because after all, you don't want to just run up on a pickup truck with a guy tied to the hood and 2 deer in the cab. And I was laying there thinking, the smartest thing to do is to do nothing. But the smartest thing isn't really my strong suit. And then I started thinking, how many times in your life do you have the opportunity to scare the pants off the duly elected officials of your county? I mean, if you were ever a teenager in a small town, you know that the police don't always have enough to do. So they come looking for you to see what you're doing. And Skeeter and I were conscientious young men who endeavored to participate in activities which allowed local law enforcement to practice the skills that they had learned at the academy. So I thought, I'm just going to make a little deer noise. And I sort of went, huh, like that. Now, I'm not saying it was a good deer noise, but it was effective. Sheriff Hasbro, all 6'8", 480 pounds of him, he just left the ground. He jumped so high that Skeeter had time to start the engine, defrost the windshield, and drive underneath of him before he ever came back down. We just made our way around that sheriff's cruiser headed on into town. Now, we were 16 years old. We weren't lawyers. We hadn't been to law school. But we had watched a lot of Starsky and Hutch. And he had never said freeze. He hadn't read us our rights. He hadn't told us we were under arrest. How were we supposed to know we were in trouble? Who knew that it was illegal to impersonate a deer? Skeeter and I just headed on into town. Now, the road in the $half dollar is pretty straight by West Virginia standards, but it is one of these up and down jobs. And after a little while, we could see that sheriff's car coming up over the hills behind us. Now, he still wasn't gaining on us. I wanted to find out what was going on, so I switched on the CB, turned it to the police channel, just in time to hear Sheriff Hasbro say, Tom was the deputy. He said, Tom, I don't care if you think I am crazy. There are 2 deer driving Skeeter Bart's pickup truck down the highway. And I believe they got Skeeter tied to the hood. And Tom said, well, good. Well, you can see how that might hurt our feelings. I switched off the CB, we headed on into town. But this was 1986. This was a long time ago. This was before CNN, certainly before the internet. We didn't even get public radio back there in $half dollar. So what people did for their news and information in the morning was turn on their police scanners. So when we came around the corner into Main Street, there were people lined up and down both sides of the street drinking coffee with their curlers in. I thought H.G. Wells was landing spaceships on the courthouse lawn. I wanted to find out what was going on, so I switched the CB back on, just in time to hear Tom say, Sheriff Hasbro, I called the FBI, just like you said. and the FBI said you should consider them two deer armed and dangerous. They said you're allowed to use lethal force if necessary. Well, that was a little bit more than me and Skeeter had bargained for, so Skeeter just pulled the truck to the side of the road, and Sheriff Hasbro pulled in behind us, and after a minute he got out of his car and came over and yelled at us for a good long time, made us take off our masks, and gave us each a ticket for the crime of mayhem, dressed as an 8-point buck. We each had to pay a little fine and do a little community service. But I think what we learned from all of this is they say that true forgiveness only comes after you've honestly repented of your sins, after you promise to never do the same thing again, and after you swear to never take any glory from the original action. So I think I can safely say, with that in mind, that Skeeter and I will never be forgiven for what we did that day.
Please join us for the remainder of our festival. Go to our Facebook page or our website at midlandstorytellingfestival.org to see the full festival schedule. Then keep it locked right here on our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tell everybody. And thank you for watching.